lot of young people have. So when they see my book and also other books that come out of diverse book movements, you know, I immediately reacted and I was like, hey, that looks like me. That looks like my family. And it goes back to what you said, JoEllen, about count me in, right? Or count on me. One of the things I wrote down when I heard you say that is I was thinking about how much it matters that when kids feel counted in, the learning and the books count. So I think one of the ways that I pursue that as an author is someone asked me recently, they said, why do you love your title? Why do you love your cover of your book so much? This is the cover of my book, Tight. And they said, why do you love it so much? And I said, well, I love it so much because the young boy there, he looks like me. He looks like students that I teach. He looks like, and a lot of times I get that at book festivals. Kids are just like, wait. And when they open up the book, they say, it sounds like me. Sounds like something that someone I know would say. That's something I'm going through, or I know someone's going through it. So we want to make sure that books are mirrors, that books reflect the young people, and that they feel that their voice and their images count inside literature.
Thanks. I hear what you're saying, and I think that's so important. And you mentioned something before the start even of your personal experience, just the phrase "count me in," and of course a bubble went off in my head, and I immediately thought of a new book, which I have over there, but I didn't want to get away from my screen. That is by Varsha Bajaj. It's about 2 middle grade students in alternative voices, and it's really dealing with racism in a community and the opportunity to really figure out and to take a stand for what matters. And it's about identity, it's about connection, it's about speaking up and speaking against injustice. And I think books like that in the middle grade in all of our classrooms, whether it's a picture book format that has that message or the middle grade or a YA title, I think those become the turning point or the entry point, if you would, for the conversations and then for the actions and that next step. So I think it's really essential that we consider that. There's even a hashtag connected to that book called Count Me In. So I apologize, I hadn't thought of that, and you just said it, Torrey, and it was like, ding, which is why I love doing this, because it's such a conversation, and we hope that people will join our conversation and add some thoughts and questions that you have as well.
One of the things that I wanted to echo is an earlier conversation, JoEllen, you and I had when we were trying to come up with the right title for this chat. And one of the words that we used was tool. I know a lot of times people use books and phrases like books as mirrors, books as windows, and we talked about books as tools. And one of the things that I want to talk about is that no one book can mean everything to a child. We have to get different books into children's hands. Some people are recommending the same book over and over and over again, and that's cool, but there's such a rich, diverse body of work that relates to young people today that young people need to know about.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, which brings me to one of the slides that we put together. Perfect timing. So I'm going to go back and pull that up, because when we talk about what's going on in our classrooms and we think about, care, for me, I think it's important to address, the TLC in our classrooms, like how are we teaching and learning with care? And that really focuses on our energies around community, the community in front of us, our global community, understanding character and the impact of all that, thinking about agency and how students and individuals take responsibility for their actions, respect and empowerment. And one of the things that you said, it really, really resonated with me because of the fact that I use a term, heart print books, and using books as co-teachers, right? But every book comes to us because of our experience with a different interpretation. And so if we think about the books that we're using, we have to be mindful then of Rosenblatt's theory, right? The reader writes the story, which is why it's so important to not only find books that kids can connect to and see themselves, but also understanding the impact of learning about ourselves, others, and the world. So there's like a little cyclical cycle that I'm actually including in a lot of the work that I'm doing, where we have to think about what whatever tool we use, whether it's an image, a newspaper, a current event. Sadly, the things that are going on in our world, we need to address in our classroom and see how that impacts change. How are we reading the world, right? How are we reading, reflecting, and then talking about it, listening to one another, opening our experiences, learning, doing something. And it's kind of like that cycle to repeat, right? So we get exposed to something, we read, we reflect, we talk, we listen, we hopefully learn more, because when we know more,
we do more, and we do better.
Exactly. So I'm going to just stop sharing here so I can let you talk for a little bit.
Yeah.
And add to that.
One of the things that I want to add on to what you brilliantly said is it's a song that comes from Lin-Manuel Miranda. It's on the Hamilton musical, and it's also on his mixtape. But the song's called "I Wrote My Way Out," and that phrase needs to be broken down. You know, I wrote my way out. I wrote my narrative into the collective narrative. I wrote my narrative into the canon. And I feel that great books always inspire young readers to then go forth and write their story. I will never forget one of my students who he told me he's allergic to reading. He came into my classroom and he saw my first book, Secret Saturdays, on the desk, and he asked if I wrote it. He couldn't believe that I wrote the book, even though my face is in the book, because where I'm from, we don't have many authors like hanging out on the street or hanging out on the corner. And here I am, you know, so he couldn't believe it. It's cognitive dissonance. So then he picks up the book and I said, you really look into it. Why don't you take it home? So he takes it home, and the next day he comes back and he gives me the book, and my heart, it just elevator drops. He didn't read it. At least that's what I thought. And then I said, did you read it? And he said, yeah. And Miss, I read it. And he puts the book down. He reaches down into his backpack and he pulls out a spiral notebook, and he has 3 pages of his handwriting. And he said, I was wondering if you could help me write my life story. And that really moved me. It moved me in the same way that when I read a book by Renee Watson, where she wrote with Malcolm X's daughter. JoEllen, you got it.
Well, wait a second now. Wait a second, because I do have another book by Renee Watson.
Oh, yes. We have to talk about that too. Yes. You know, it's funny because I often, when people ask me about my writing, I can't stop talking about some other people's writing. And Renee Watson is a writer who I can't stop talking about. She wrote this book called Betty Before X. And I'll never forget this one girl in my classroom. She comes up to me. She says to me, Mr. T, you need to read this book. And I said, what book? And she said, Number the Stars. Right? I said, Number the Stars. All right, I'm going to read this book. So I read the book, and it felt like it was a mirror reflection of what a lot of what Renee was trying to say in Betty Before X. So I gave her a homework assignment. After she gave me my homework assignment to read a book, I said, would you read this book by Renee Watson? And she read it, and she did the same thing that boy did. She came back and she had her own writing on the page, and she said, I want to tell my story from a young Mexican-American girl's perspective. So like going back to what we were saying, books as tools, books as vehicles. I also think books are trampolines to get kids to springboard their story into the hands of other readers.
I love that. I love that vision of a trampoline and that springing and jumping off point. I think both things are so powerful, right? Because there are kids who, if you don't know something, you don't know something. And to experience that through the eyes or the lens of another character, or even multiple perspectives, that's the jumping off point that's so essential. And I really think that what you said is so powerful too, because it's not about the book. You know, we say that a lot. Julia Torrey is my colleague and
Julia, woo!
book ambassador. You know, we often are asked for titles, and we certainly share with all the joy and love in our hearts. But, you know, the next words out of our mouth is, and this is one way you might use them, or this is one way that it's been impactful for kids. But the idea is that it's the conversations around those books and what each book means for different kids and for different experiences and for different times. Like, it's just so essential. And I love Renee Watson's Watch Us Rise. Right. If you haven't read that one.
You can't do that to me, JoEllen. You're holding her book up. I want to reach through the screen and grab that book and hug it.
I have that effect. And so again, it's not about the book, but one of the things as a young activist, you know, and the narrators in that book being young activists and taking control and using literacy as a tool. I mean, it is really the poster for this session of what we're doing. You know, it's like you could use that because of the fact that they start a club in their school, they start, you know, doing some poetry slams and speaking on, you know, topics that are of interest to them and interest their life lessons, right? Because books and stories, they're shared experiences that connect us, but it's the life lessons that we get from those books that impact the care and what we do. You know, as Chris said this morning, literacy is not neutral. And we have to
It's
take a
not.
step off that fence. I love when he said that. Did you see when he said this morning? I thought that was so great. Like, you know, we can't be on the fence. We have to take a stand. We have to do something about it. And I think that, you know, you and I, as educators and presenters in this session, we're trying to balance not only just the tools of the book, but thinking about practice. And it's really the practice in our classrooms that's going to impact with, you know, the effect of what happens to kids in their work. And so we hope that the stories that we share, the experiences, the opportunities will then continue on to more than just that one shared experience, right?
Definitely. Um, you know, we were talking about books as tools, and we were talking about books as different types of tools. And I was saying that no one book can mean everything to a child. And I also want to say something else, that no one writing style speaks to every child. Just the other day, Varian Johnson, he got on Twitter and he tweeted that he was sharing one of the great lyricists with his daughter, Rakim, a rapper. And I responded with my tweet that, you know, whenever someone asks me which storytellers inspired me to write stories, I talk about certain hip hop artists. Rakim is one of them. And I have to say that sometimes we want to expose prose to young people, and that's cool. You know, there's a lot of young people who respond to that. And there is a power in poetry. And this is what Varian was saying, and this is also what I'm echoing. A lot of times I will bring in a rhyme and I will share it with my students, and it will resonate with them so hard that the poets in the group who are experimenting with that, they will respond poetically. So I think that we want to throw a lot at young people, that a lot of different writing styles. So let's serve a lot of different writing styles at young people so they could volley back their writing in their own style.
Absolutely. I love that. As a matter of fact, I know I keep saying I don't want to get up, but I do want to get up because behind me I have,
Gotta get up, stand up.
I have to get up. I'm sorry, I have to get up.
To quote Bob Marley. You know, it's funny, every time we
Me.
keep talking, I keep hearing different quotes, like "Rise up" from Hamilton again. Get up.
Yes.
I'm glad you got up and stood up just now. Oh, I know.
Carol
Carol
Weston
Weatherford.
Weatherford. I mean, come
What?
on, The Roots of Rap. What
Yes.
a powerful, powerful book. And the illustrations in this book are to die for. I mean, every picture takes my breath away. And I just used this with a class of high school students, and I paired it with another book, which I'm not going to get up right now, that's called Beyond the Song. And that text, if you're not familiar with it, for those of you watching, is a short collection, or a bigger collection of short essays from authors using lyrics or experience, taking those musical moments and turning them to memories. And so again, if we think about narrative, you know, just changing the opportunity and widening that perspective for kids to take something that they respond to, they're passionate about, and think about unpacking the lyrics. We spend so much time talking about craft lessons in text, but it's more than just looking at those classics and the canons. It's also thinking about finding opportunity through song, through poetry, through media, and then how does that impact what you might do about it because of what you've learned? I think that's really the key. What will you do with that information, and how is that going to change or make you and hopefully others better because of it, right?
If I could share a personal story, and make sure my mom doesn't see this video because she hates when I share this story. She likes to, you know, she's a great mom, like all moms are, and moms brag on their children. And my mom likes to say that I came out the womb writing, and that's not true. When I was a reluctant reader for a long time, I attended a failing school. The books I was exposed to, they dismissed me. They dismissed the people around me. They dismissed where I was from. So I had unhooked from books so hard that I had to repeat a grade. My mom hates when I share that. She likes to think of me as an advanced learner. But the reality is that sometimes we, like the Aaliyah song, you know, at first you don't succeed, pick yourself up and try again. I failed, you know, in the third grade, and I was left behind, and I kept failing and to pick up a book that I really connected with. And my mom made an agreement with me. She said, "You can read any book, and I'll buy that book for you, but just as long as you're reading." And I went straight to the comic book store. So this is our segue into graphic novels. And I picked up some comics, and I got hooked so hard to comics that it was about third, fourth grade that I had told myself that if ever I could get enough mastery of the English language, I would try to write something that had that thrill, had all of the great ingredients of comic books. And we were talking about serving lots of different writing styles to young people so they could volley back writing in their own style. We have to give credit to the great graphic novels out there that are engaging young readers, you know, of all ages. One of the persons I gotta shout out right now is Natasha Bustos. She is the illustrator of Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. And Lawrence Fishburne just picked that up, and he's going to produce that into an animated series. It's this beautiful young African-American girl. She's the smartest girl in the whole Marvel universe. And she has these beautiful Afro puffs. And I see young people look at that, girls and boys, look at that girl, and they have this feeling of, yes, I can. Me too. I can do it, you know. So it's just this. It's just there's a lot of rich graphic novels out there too that we need to expose young people to.
Absolutely. And I think it goes back to when we talk about literacy and broadening the perspective and definition of that, because it's not just, book, graphic novel, text. It's media, it's news, it's images, it's art. One of the slides that I wanted to share was actually looking at the artist Fabiana Rodriguez. I'm not sure if you're familiar, and I'm going to hit share in a second. I was just moving things around. That's the only stressful, well, I shouldn't say only. One of the stressors when you do this is trying to multitask and kind of get everything going on the screen. But if you're familiar with, Fabiana and her work, she's someone that we study often. And thanks to my collaboration with a phenomenal art teacher in one of my school districts, Eric Sumner, he's actually on Twitter, and his name was on one of the slides, and I'm going to share all the slides at the end. He often takes her artwork and shares the story, or asks kids to know the story and develop opportunities where kids can find connections in their own lives and their experiences, and then bring that to fruition through art and their own expression of art. And that can be poetry, that can be images, it can be photos, and on and on and on. And so, when you think about how we have literacy as a vehicle to care, looking at her artwork and then maybe pairing it with a picture book like I Have the Right to Be a Child, and then going out into the world to see, what rights are we privy to, and some of us more than others, and being aware of privilege and power and all of those things, which really impacts the caring environment that we live in. And unfortunately, we know that there isn't an equitable world right now, and we really need to strive very hard to fix that. Sadly, I have an experience that I have to share because I'm from Long Island, and you said, Brooklyn, Long Island, Queens. I'm originally a Brooklyn, Queens girl myself. They're all the same on the same island, right?
Oh, but, yeah, every time I go out of state, I hear one of our accents, and I'm like, we might as well be living in the same building.
So sorry, everyone. We apologize. Anyway, what I was going to say, which is on a much more serious note, is sadly, there was an incident recently, and not to get into all the specifics, but through this heart-wrenching, tragedy, an experience that is far too common in many locations, there were kids who, instead of helping and reaching out to do something, they actually started to film on their cameras what was happening when a young boy was stabbed and killed. And, I think that the society that has been almost, become numb to certain things when there's a constant impact of violence and such injustices. I think that we have to control, we can control in our classrooms, right? And so it's our job, it's our responsibility to use literacy as a vehicle to care, so that doesn't continue to happen in this world, right? So I don't want to get all heavy on that, but I just think that it starts, yes, of course, in the homes, but in our classrooms too. We don't know what other experiences kids have outside in their homes, good, bad, or indifferent. We can control the type of environment we have, which is why literacy is a vehicle, shared experiences, read alouds that build those moments and memories and really unite kids to care for and one another, care for and about one another. I think is there's no other reason greater than that as why we need to make this part of our teaching practices.
Right. Sometimes we operate in silos. We build empathy in our classrooms, or we build empathy through our books, but then it stops there. And it's not just about building empathy, but it's about spreading empathy. The example that you used about the young people who were filming stabbing, we can name countless examples like that. I grew up in Red Hook Projects, Brooklyn, New York, and it took a village to raise me, like it takes a village to raise a child. And I have to say that Life magazine in 1988 titled my neighborhood the crack capital of the United States and one of the 10 worst neighborhoods in the United States. So a lot of the things that we see that go viral, I saw on a daily basis. And I have to say that you have to be the change that you want to see. That's what my mom told me. My mom told me a Maya Angelou quote, be the rainbow in someone's cloud. My mom said, yeah, you're seeing all of this here, but are you going to continue it? Are you going to be, and she was talking about disruptive language. You're going to be a disruptor and you're going to disrupt this. So I want to say as adults, we have a lot of power in terms of the focus. There's a saying that what you focus on grows. And I have a saying, let's spotlight what's right. We could talk about how young people are filming stabbings, or we could talk about the young Black man who saw two Black boys about to fist fight while the other Black teens were videotaping it. He stepped in and he made them talk to each other and he made them become friends. We've seen instances like that. We've seen young Black teens running into burning buildings to save white young people. There's so many different examples of positivity and empathy and common humanity and caring and connection that we could find. And we can make it go viral if we get our allies to help us. So I'm really big about let's not operate in silos. Let's link up with other people and let's hold our people, all of our allies, accountable to step up, to rise up, to stand up, and to spread empathy.
I couldn't agree more. I wanted to pull up the slide because I think that's where I was going with this, that, we have to take the time and the opportunity in our classrooms to, think about, you said, be the change. I think of Sarah Ahmed's book, Being the Change, a fabulous professional resource for teachers, or a book by Stephen Wolk called Caring Hearts and Critical Minds, and thinking how we can infuse into our literacy practices opportunities. So it's not an either or, but it's a yes and we're doing this, right? And then we're really trying to impact the individuals that we work with and celebrating those opportunities for the work that we're doing. And when we're learning about history, we're learning about current events, we're learning about experiences and how we can then make a difference. And so even thinking about Talk About Understanding, which is a phenomenal resource by Ellen Keene, she talks about different spectrums of empathy, which reminds me of how you talk about the bully spectrum. In your work related to TIGHT. And I think we have to also think of a spectrum or a continuum of care too. Right. And so that our job as educators is how are we trying to increase not only the presence of care, but the corresponding actions around that. So do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Yes. Empathy is expressed in degrees. Someone says, I'm doing this to build understanding and common humanity. Great. That's what they're doing. If you look at it at a ruler, right? This is where you are. That could be equivalent to an inch. Now, what about this? I see other people doing this. Do you think you can do this? And it goes back to the quote, when you know better, you do better. We have to see more examples, be exposed to more examples of empathy. So well, there's this saying I love it, kids will often be what they see. We definitely want to expose a spectrum of empathy to young people and give them concrete examples of what empathy and empathetic action looks like so that they could see it and then be it. Um, you know, Empathy it happens in degrees. Bullying happens in degrees. I was at a school, and it was like 300 kids inside the audience, and someone raises their hand and they ask if in the book Tight, this book here, if this is the book, my second book that I wrote, they asked about his friend Mike. He said, "Do you like Mike?" They asked me, "Do you like Mike? And do you think that he's a good kid?" There's a William Shakespeare quote, "Nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so." When we fall into the stereotypes of good and bad, we could label a whole community as bad, a whole neighborhood as bad, a whole people as bad, or a whole community as the vice versa, the opposite, the converse. One of the things I want to say is, instead of answering the question, is Mike, the bully, a bad kid? I asked the group, I said, how many of you, if you had Mike, you would like to hang out with him? And about 70% of the group raised their hands. They liked Mike. And I said, okay, cool. If Mike, do you know any Mikes? Point to the Mike inside this room. And the kids started pointing to other kids and saying, oh, she's a Mike and he's a Mike. And I said, okay, cool. So are these bad kids that are sitting around you? And they're like, no, that's my girl, that's my boy. And I said, okay, cool. So one of the things I want us to realize is that, bullying can happen on spectrums. You can have somebody who's pushing you into a locker, stealing your lunch money, but you can have somebody who's just backstabbing you with words and being, a verbal bully. There's a lot. So we just want to make sure that we're letting everybody know every core value you expose a kid to, let them know there are degrees of expressing that core value.
Absolutely. So just because we're nearing the end, I can't believe how time is flying. Going back to the resources, just a couple things I wanted to add to the conversation. And I put this on the bottom. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with Teaching Tolerance as a fabulous resource. They also have the social justice standards. Facing history in ourselves and thinking about how choices impact, history and just every day, and trying to take time to encourage teachers to explore not only these resources, but these practices. Thinking about the image there comes from Wordless News by Maria Fabrizio, which she was on a little bit of a hiatus, but she's back now. And she takes powerful current event articles and creates graphic images for students to reflect on, and then you can, go to the article to do further investigation. But, it's not just about looking at those, it's what you'll do next. And so Torrey and I have been somewhat vague in terms of the books, but more instead about the tools. So this is another resource, beyond book lists. You might want to instead think about, who is in front of you, what's happening in the moment. Are we researching? Are we reading? Are we reflecting and repeating that cycle? And some great resources and places to go to find books that are really powerful, and, own voices and additional resources that will help add to the conversation, I think is really important. If anybody has questions for us or thoughts, we have a couple questions for you. We wanted to kind of end with, and we hope that you will consider thinking about bringing back into your classroom. These are questions to ask your kids after different experiences, right? So if you want to just take a moment, if anybody feels like responding, it's really hard to multitask on the on the session and look, but I will absolutely respond.
You're doing a great job, JoEllen.
I'm sorry?
You're doing a great job.
I'm trying. It's so hard to multitask. Can I just add one thing before we go? Because my literacy mind is blowing when you said about labeling. I think, going back to practice too, it's such a problem when we look at anything with a deficit model, and even thinking about kids in terms of reading or writing and quantifiable data, which of course is important, but it's what you do with that data that leads to the next steps, because kids are, so much more than levels. It's about reading lives and writing lives. And we hope after this session that, you'll continue the conversation to do this work, because you make the difference.
One last thing I want to say, as an educator, we need to get off our own fan wagon, and we need to become fans of the kids. And we need to have them center their voices in what's going on, and let them drive the conversation. And that's a great way to build care.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much. That was really powerful for me as a viewer. And I know watching the tweets on Twitter that you guys have reached a lot of hearts and minds too out there today. So thank you so much for your time and your thoughts and your words. If you joined us mid-session, our video will be archived on the web, on the EdCollab website, and you can watch from beginning to end all the wonderful words from our speakers today. At this time, you can take a break, grab a snack, and get ready for session 3, starting at 1 Eastern. And we are super excited for our speakers coming up in the next session. JoEllen and Torrey, thank you again for your talents today and your time. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Torrey.
Thank you.
I can't wait to go back and watch all the rest of the sessions.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.